Skyrim VR is still one of the best VR games available, but the VR port was very basic, and it makes the game feel very dated compared to a lot of more modern VR games. Luckily, the modding community over the years have massively improved the game, and they've added a bunch of welcome features to make Skyrim VR even better. A big part of the game is combat. You've got melee, ranged with a bow and arrow, as well as magic attacks. If you want to use swords or other melee weapons, originally the game was very unbalanced. Weapons didn't have any weight, and you could swing them as fast as you want, including waggling your wrists, and the sword won't make any connection to the enemy, and it just goes through them, but it will cause damage. It makes the melee attacks feel pretty poor, and you can just choose your way through the game, making it very easy. Now, thanks to a mod called Plank, melee combat is much improved. Weapons don't ghost through people or enemies anymore, they actually make connection with them, and whilst it's still possible to really swing fast, you can't waggle anymore. It just feels so much more satisfying, and now having a melee focused build is actually worth it. There's actually another mod as well which lets you throw weapons, and then you can use the trigger to bring them back to your hand. It does feel a little bit overpowered, but honestly it feels so much fun it's hard not to use it. I personally like to use it to down an enemy, then finish them off with some sword swings. What about archery? Before, you loaded the arrow into the bow, and once you fired it, a new arrow would spawn in your hand. This meant that you could fire off arrows really quickly, making the bow and arrow very overpowered. Using a mod called Simple Realistic Archery, now you've got a quiver over your shoulder, so after each shot you need to reach over your shoulder to grab a new arrow. Not only does this feel more immersive, but it helps balance things out as you have to take the time to grab and load a new arrow rather than just rapid fire them quickly. Magic is another big way to attack in Skyrim, but this has also been improved. It works the same way as before, where you have a spell in your hand and you can see the spell when it's equipped, but visually, thanks to some other mods, it looks much nicer now. I'll talk more about the visual side of things later, but it also changes the hand position you need to use to fire the spell out. Before, it was like firing a gun, so you hand forward and pull the trigger. Now it comes from the palm of your hand, so you need to hold your hand out in a much more natural position, like how Iron Man holds his hands out when firing his blasters. Dual spells have also been massively improved, with a mod called Magic Improvements to Skyrim VR. Before, dual spell casting was done just like one-handed, so you would still aim and fire with your left hand and the spell effects would stay in the left hand. Now with the mod, spells will be central to both hands even if you move them around. The aim accounts for both hands' position rather than just the left hand, which looks and feels much more satisfying. One thing you probably notice in these comparisons is how in the original version you just had floating hands, but when you equip a weapon, the hand disappears and you're left with a floating weapon like a sword or shield. An absolute must mod, and a lot of other mods require this, is VRIK. This mod adds arms and a full body to the game, and now when you equip a weapon, your hands and body is still there, just like any modern VR game. You get a full sense of presence and it massively improves immersion. Being able to look and see your new arm that you just equipped also makes upgrading your armor so much more interesting. But VRIK doesn't just add the body, you now have a holster system where you can put weapons and potions on slots which you can quickly access without going through menus. This massively improves usability because you can now quickly put away and switch to magic or grab a bow and arrow over your shoulder. Before, you could equip your weapons you wanted through the menu, and you could press the grip button to holster them and again to bring them back up. But if you wanted to change weapons or magic spells, you needed to go into the menu, find the thing that you needed and equip it to use it. But it doesn't end there. You've also got a gesture system which is fully configurable so that you can assign a button press plus certain movements of the hand to activate spells or use things like potions. This is really handy to allow you to quickly use a potion or a shout without having to go through menus or other systems, allowing you to stay in the action for longer. An example of this would be how I set up my shouts so that you have to press the touchpad on the right controller and then you push your hand forward to activate it. Another mod that really helps with switching and changing weapons is the Spell Wheel mod. This works like Blade and Sorcery, where you press a button or a combination of buttons, which by default is pressing the grip and the trigger button together, and now you can move your hand to pick up the item that you want and then let go and it appears in your hand. All of these mods work great together, and it gives you lots of options to switch and change without having to pause the game and go scrolling through menus with your thumbstick. HIGGS is a mod that lets you interact with the world. It's got collisions and physics so that you can move things with your hands. You can now pick things up directly with your hands, whereas before you had to aim at an object and then press a button. And there's a force grab where you can grab objects from a distance and then pull them towards you like in Half-Life Alyx. I do find that the way that they lock onto objects to force grab a bit finicky. I end up having to move my hand around a little to find the sweet spot, but overall it's still nice to have the option to mess around more with the environments and pick things up naturally. Another huge mod to improve immersion is Immersive Smithing, which is a complete overhaul for the smithing system. Now you can actually craft and upgrade weapons with your own hands. This includes using a forge to heat up weapons and then hit them with a crafting hammer, and you can sharpen the weapons using a grinding wheel. Some of the mods help with quality of life when playing the game and are customizable. For example, I'm personally running with no HUD, so I've just got the compass which you have to look down to see. I've also got minimal enemy health bar option. You can just about see the health bar, but it's much more subtle. For things like health and stamina, you've got a set of bars on your left wrist, but you can also set up different ways to display them on your hands. I've got my health and stamina on top of my right hand, and my magic is displayed through a set of rings on my fingers on my left. It's a really nice visual system that makes checking health very easy without stuff floating in front of your face. They've also got things like being able to crouch in real life to activate sneak. There are loads of mods to improve visuals. By default, you've got two options: temporal anti-aliasing and FXAA. TAA makes everything blurry, and FXAA makes things look sharper, but it also adds a lot of shimmer, especially on things like trees. But now you've got some upscaling options like DLAA, DLLS and FSR. Personally, I'm using DLAA, which works great, but DLAA and DLSS only work on Nvidia cards. If you're using an AMD card, then you're stuck with FSR, which isn't as good. Reshade Glamour is a reshade profile that adds ambient occlusion and bounce lighting, as well as some sharpening, which makes the game, well, sharper. There are so many graphics upgrades, I can't list them all, but some of the highlights include a bunch of different weather upgrade mods. These add loads of different weather and environmental effects like fog up into the mountains that give a more cinematic look. You've got mods that improve the look of clouds, lightning mods that give you a real show during stormy weather. True Storms overhauls the existing weather system, adding more variance and diversity, and it makes them more dramatic, and it really adds to the atmosphere. Like in this example, I went up into the mountain at night and there was no weather. I died, and then the second time I went up, a blizzard came in, completely changing the feel of the same section of the game. At night, you've got these beautiful aurora in the sky, with two moons and the clouds. It just looks incredible. There are mods that improve fire effects. Lux reworks the lighting for interiors. Before, the interiors in things like caves looked way too bright, but now they're darker with more atmosphere, with some nicer looking lighting effects. Water effects look much nicer, with mods that add water reflections. You've got mods that upgrade the look of cities, better quality weapon models, and you've got NPC AI overhaul mods that improve the way the NPCs act around you. Character model updates that dramatically improve the look of NPCs, including enemies, and improve textures on all creatures in the game. There are loads of smaller mods that tweak and change things, like difficulty balance and fix bugs. And the best part of all is that you don't have to mess around trying to figure out which mods to install. Thanks to Kanga and another modder's name that I can't pronounce, it's surprisingly easy to install all these mods and have them working on your PC. You want to use a program called Wabberjack, which allows other people to make mod lists, and then people like me can download them. The one that I'm using is called FUS, and it's fully modular so that you can tweak and change things to your liking. I'll put a link in the description to a video from Virtual Panda who goes into detail on how to install these mods, but it really is so much easier than it used to be. I was able to set this up and leave it downloading overnight, then after a few tweaks I was playing the game within an hour. The game is incredibly stable. I've only had one crash in the past 5 hours of gameplay, and it really does make the game so much more enjoyable. This video is just highlighting some of the best mods that are changing the game, but if you think I've missed some, then let me know. I know there's one that came out recently that uses ChatGPT to give you an AI companion who talks to you based on what you actually say using your real voice. If you made it this far, then thanks, and an extra special thanks to my beautiful Patreon and YouTube members. You're the best.